Now, Mr. Secretary, the government just rolling out its biggest relief package ever, valued at 18 billion US dollars, I should say, saving struggling businesses as well as ensuring 1.5 million workers getting paid. But some critics are saying that this money is being sprayed indiscriminately into the economy. What do you say to that?
I think everybody knows that Hong Kong and, in fact, the global economy are fighting a twin battle. One, of course, is the fight against the epidemic, and the other is, in fact, fighting to save the economy. And the second battle could not be winning without winning the first one. So we are tackling in both fronts. But as we all see around the world, cities are being locked down, economy at its doldrum. So I think it requires the whole community to come together, and therefore government should stand in the forefront to help. And I think you have pick up all the essential figures at your fingertip. This is the largest unprecedented single injection by the government into our economy. And for any sort of economic relief package to able to make an impact, it must fulfill a certain requirement. First of all, it must be a sizable sum. And as you rightly quoted, the injection, the two packages launched only in this 2 months, amount to almost 10% of our GDP. And it must be across the board to help as many people as possible. So the scheme that we recently rolled out cover essentially a scheme to help more than 250,000 enterprises so that they can keep more than 2.5 million jobs in Hong Kong. We're only excluding those subvented sector government departments. So it must be as widely covered as possible. And thirdly, it must also target certain hard-hit sectors. We are doubling up on sectors which has been dormant. For instance, the travel industry, the aviation industry, the transportation. So these are the major requirements. The last but not least is, of course, a timely delivery of this money to the hands of those in need. And we have experienced in the last anti-epidemic fund, majority of the sectorial subsidies are able to dish out in a relatively short period of time. Some of these companies, for instance, the travel industry sector under my portfolio, they already got the initial phase of money where they can able to meet with some of the major outgoings. I think that's the plan that we are doing.
Okay, when you talk about timely, many people are also waiting on that 10,000 Hong Kong dollar cash handout that was announced in February by the Financial Secretary within his budget. This has yet to reach the pockets of Hong Kong's permanent residents. Can you give us an update on how soon we will see this happen?
Yeah, we are making all the preparation for that 10,000 Hong Kong dollar for every single adult of Hong Kong residents. And once the budget is to be approved around hopefully in late May or June, money should be dished out around July. Now that was the earlier phase. That's cover everybody. But in the meantime, we have in fact rolled out different packages. One was actually slightly preceding the budget, which we call the anti-epidemic fund 1.0. That cover, in fact, over almost a dozen sectors where we are giving money to major sectors which are heavily hit by the epidemic. We are doubling up the second phase by a very widely covered sector, which is called the Employment Subsidy Scheme. Is essentially giving money to all the enterprises so that they can pay for all the employees they are keeping. Now, in this difficult time, the biggest challenge for firms are in fact one, how to keep the business going, and secondly, cash flow. So yes. The employment scheme is there to support them to keep the labor force, which is very important in a service economy like Hong Kong. Yeah. Hi.
And Edward, just what would be a sign of success then? What would you want to see in terms of companies using those measures to retain labour? And when you look at the numbers, I know it's very hard to do projections under the current environment of uncertainty. can we see the jobless rate being capped in Hong Kong at a certain level, or job losses limited? That's one question I have for you. And broadly, how would you describe household and business sentiment right now? And when do you think confidence is going to meaningfully return?
Yeah, actually, if you read the figures has a time delay. For instance, the latest figure about unemployment is still stood at 3.7%, which is quite moderate. But I believe, well, if we are not doing anything, I think it will drop very, very sharply. And in fact, in certain sectors like travel industry, they in fact dropped more significantly than the territory-wide total. So for firms, I think, well, many enterprises want to stay on. And for them to stay on, first, I think they need to keep all the people in the payroll because, well, as a service economy, talent, employee are one of the biggest assets. And secondly, I think they need cash flow. They definitely need cash flow to sort of hold on to this bitterly cold, prolonged winter. And that's why there is in parallel a loan scheme up to the amount of 123 billion Hong Kong dollar in supporting enterprises of all sizes. Now, these are two major measures, hopefully to get enterprises going, so as to prevent or allow them to sort of hold on to the business until the time that, well, we are able to sort of reopen the city, the economy. So we are watching all these figures. At the same time, well, your second question is, it all depends on two things. One is whether the city can sort of embark after we have seen the full containment, the subside of the confirmed cases. But at the same time, we also need to look at the global picture because we're in this pandemic. No city, no government, no country is being spared. And Hong Kong being a highly international city, while we are sort of holding on vigorously, but we also need to see the whole world sort of getting back on its own feet.
Right.
Our major market across the Pacific,
right.
Our market out there in Europe, and also in our adjacent neighbor, the mainland China.
And Edward, again, when it comes to forecasting, very, very tricky. I sympathise and I understand. But when you consider the net effect of all these unprecedented measures, stimulus and lifelines that you've thrown at the depressed economy, do you think that it will reduce the duration of the recession? Do you think Hong Kong comes out of recession sooner rather than later? And where do you put the economic number, the growth rate, at the end of 2020 and looking into 2021?
I don't think any economist or government official can put hand on heart to answer the question. It's not the time to talk about coming out from the recession, but rather how to help each other to sort of tie over in this, as I described, bitterly cold winter. Now, I believe that the injection itself, this huge amount, unprecedented sum, would hopefully, by any sort of calculation, give a boost of no less than 5% of our GDP. But it depends on how steep the curve come down from this recession. Now, secondly, it also depends on how the global economy is picking up. And I believe that would require a lot of joint efforts by everybody in this global economy by sort of working together, first of all, fight the pandemic, and secondly, remove any barrier which remains to sort of hinder trade, for instance, and services across the boundary. We are also seeing that, well, different governments are sort of putting their resources together. And I think it's what we are in need is both resources and also resolve and also unity as in this fight, as there is basically no immunity for anyone under the pandemic.
Mr. Secretary, at least 10 different types of business have been subject to a government-forced shutdown for at least 4 weeks to control the outbreak. Can you tell us how long do you expect them to remain shut? And my second part of the question is Hong Kong being brought to its knees by first the trade war, then we had social unrest, and now COVID-19. How is the government preparing for a protracted recovery?
Yes. First of all, again, on timing is very difficult to say. But I think, well, knowing Hong Kong, you know how we are closely needed as a sort of international community, both within and with outside. So when I say that, well, any relief package would need to be across the board, plus sort of helping the hard hit industry, that also says that, well, we cannot just focus resources on a single sector because they're intertwined and they're helping each other, big and small. And that's why, for instance, in our most recently launched loan scheme, which include a 100% guarantee loan scheme, plus 2 running sort of government support, 80% and 90% guarantee scheme. We are trying to extend this network of loan facility to all enterprises, including big and small. For the first time, we give this loan also to publicly listed company, because within the ecosystem, big and small, they are heavily tied to each other. Likewise, in the global supply chain, Hong Kong is connected to the global world. So in a way, that's why I keep on emphasizing that, well, this must be a sort of global effort. As to the second question, you mentioned rightly that, well, we are hit by a number of sort of factors in the last 18 to 24 months. US-China trade war has given us the collateral damage. The social unrest last year has in fact sort of causing some downturn in the economy, and with this. But I think, well, that also says Hong Kong remains highly resilient. Well, despite all these negative factors, I think we have survived in the US-China trade war. That, well, there was no sort of a mass exodus of import and export firms. Actually, they hold on quite strongly. We are working ourselves out from the sort of impact of the social unrest, and now I think we are fighting this twin battle, as I mentioned in the outset, that we tackle the disease and also help each other in the global economy.